Right, this gentleman we all know as Tintoretto, but his actual name was Jacopo Robusti. He was born in Venice in 1518 and died at the end of the century of 1594. So he lived entirely in the 1500s or the 16th century. His father was a dyer, hence his son's name, which means little dyer, Tintoretto. But he was also quickly known for the speed with which he painted, and that earned him the nickname of Il Furioso. His work is characterized by strong figures in dramatic gesture and deep perspective in the Mannerist style. Now, I don't think we've encountered the Mannerist style per se so far. It sort of lasted during the 16th century, and it was characterized by what is called a contrived elegance and a deliberate distortion of the human figure using elongated forms, unnatural poses in loud colours. And we see mannerism strongest in the work of El Greco. If El Greco is somebody we haven't touched on so far, but I'm sure you can all bring El Greco figures to the forefront of your imaginations. So little is known of Tintoretto's childhood or training. It's said he began in Titian's studio, but was dismissed after a few days. We don't know why, but he was left to teach himself in straitened circumstances. So he's self-taught painter. He quickly became an accomplished painter, receiving commissions for scenes from the Bible. These were large-scale paintings intended for the side walls of chapels in Venice. Tintoretto composed these paintings with an off-center perspective so that they could be effectively seen by worshippers from below. In around 1560, Tintoretto married his second wife, Faustina de Vescovi. They had 7 children who survived to adulthood. Nothing is known of his first wife except that he had a child with her, Marietta, and she became a highly regarded painter in her own right, obviously trained by her father. Now this is the Scuola Grande di San Rocco. I'm sure I mispronounced that. Probably it should be more like the English Scuola Grande di San Rocco. So between 1565 and 67, so in the second half of the century really, and again from 1575 to 1588, Tintoretto produced a large number of paintings for the walls and ceilings of the Scuola Grande di San Rocco, many of which we will see presently. 21 canvases on the ceiling recount key episodes from the Old Testament, while 13 canvases adorning the walls relate to episodes from the New Testament. The Scuola was a charitable and religious organization for the laity. This one was built particularly as a protection against the plague. The development of fast painting techniques in his busy studio of assistants allowed him to produce many works at the same time. Thus he was able to produce a greater number of paintings for the state than any of his competitors. The crowning production of Tintoretto's life was the vast Paradise painting for the Doge's palace. Now we'll see this a bit later on, but it's impressive for its size alone. 9 meters tall and 22 meters long. As such, it remains the largest painting ever done on canvas. Tintoretto scarcely ever travelled away from Venice. As a youth, he played the lute and various instruments and designed theatrical costumes and stage sets. It's said he also was at home with mechanical devices. Generally of a reclusive disposition, he was entirely devoted to his work, of course. It's also reported that he was an agreeable companion. So that's as much as I'm going to say about his life, because there isn't too much to say really. And so we'll press on with the paintings. So this is of an early painting. In fact, it's his earliest. The Sacra Conversione follows the convention of casual chat with saints. Tintoretto was only 20 when he painted this. As you can see, the figures are all very animated in the Mannerist style. The Virgin sits cross-legged, a pose he borrowed from Michelangelo. And I'm sure you'll readily appreciate the fact that Jesus seems to be very precariously balanced there on his mother's lap. He almost about to topple off, I would say. And the figures around the Madonna and Child are in various stages of gesture, talking to each other, or probably a bit over the top, you'd say, but that's the Mannerist style, of course, and it's very colourful. One has to say that. I suspect this figure is John the Baptist. So that's his earliest painting. It's quite a large painting, 67 by 96. So that's 5'6" by 8 foot, something like that. But it's we're going to see a lot larger paintings. Now this is an unusual version of St. Paul, the conversion of St. Paul, of course. Tintoretto portrayed the scene as chaos, basically. Confused men and horses crash about in panic, suggested by the clouds at the top of the painting and the landscape generally, and the rivers rushing by. People are in the rivers. They so completely panicked by this interruption in their lives and the journey of on the road to Damascus. And there we can see in the top left-hand corner, Tintoretto has suggested God there in his beard and mulberry-coloured clothing. So I'm not quite sure which one is St. Paul. I suspect because it's centre of the bottom centre of the painting that this might be St. Paul, but also this could be as well, possibly, because he's already on the horse. So there we are. But it's a rather confused painting, deliberately to show the panic, I suppose, of the Damascene moment, the epiphany, the moment of epiphany, that is so significant to Christian ideology. Right, this is a more subdued and quieter painting. Christ Among the Doctors. It's a larger painting as well, as you can see. Tintoretto's Christ Among the Doctors depicts the biblical scene where Jesus, aged 12, debates with the rabbis in the temple. We see here this innovative approach in the use of perspective and dynamic figures typical of the Mannerist style. The eye has to search for Jesus as though at the end of a tunnel of erudition suggested by these doubtful twisting figures. So there's Jesus, and he's already ensconced on a throne, which is not typical of this interpretation of this biblical scene. It's rather presupposing the future in a sense, but he's only 12 according to St. Luke. So there we are. A lot of figures. Tintoretto packs his paintings with loads of figures. The figure on the left in the yellow cloak, that's this figure here. It's suggested may be a portrait of Titian, and it's also suggested that this clean-shaven figure here might be a self-portrait. This painting is the Miracle of the Slave. Now we get into these very large canvases that his studio produced. This is 13 foot by 18 foot, huge canvas, again crowded with loads of people. Prior to the events shown in the painting, the slave wants to visit the tomb of St. Mark at Venice, but his master forbids it. Now this is the slave, he's prostrate on the floor there. There's a reason for that. The slave goes anyway to Venice, and the painting shows the slave's arrival back at the master's residence when his master, seated on the extreme right there and elevated, as you can see, calls for the slave's legs to be broken in punishment. The slave appeals to St. Mark, and we take this figure, this upside down figure at the top, to be St. Mark. And the instruments, as a result of his appeal, the instruments of torture are shattered. So there we see them right at the bottom there, with the broken instruments of torture, whatever they were. And this, we take this to be the executioner or torturer, showing the broken instruments to the master. Miracle of the Slave is a classic example of Venetian mannerism. It was the first notable work of Tintoretto's career. Prior to this painting, Tintoretto was continually told his brushwork was too rushed and his work unfinished. Titian was an open critic of Tintoretto's work up to this point. But this painting does represent the biggest commission Tintoretto had received, and it led to numerous other commissions. So it's a good example of the Mannerist style. Everybody is in a hyperbole of gesture. You can see it particularly in the master there. Obviously the slave is quietly lying on his back where he's been told to lie, I suppose. And it's a nice balance in this painting because we've got these characters in this sort of mulberry red or cerise, I don't know what you might call that, a light, very light maroon perhaps. And he's balanced with the master, the balding bearded master on the right there. So there's a nice symmetry to this painting, I think, and then the middle ground is populated with the people come to see the slave being dealt with, I suppose. Note as well the architecture in the background there, classic style architecture. This is a curious painting. This painting is known for its dramatic composition, intense colouring, and the heightened emotions in the Mannerist style again. In Greek mythology, Zeus sent a great flood to punish humanity's wickedness. Deucalion, son of Prometheus, and his wife Pyrrha were the only survivors of this flood. They built a boat and eventually landed on Mount Parnassus. Now, if you think Exodus, there are shades of Exodus in this story, this legend. Well, obviously Exodus came first, so the Greeks were pinching them from the Old Testament, presumably. After the flood, the two survivors consulted the oracle of Themis about repopulating the earth. So there they are. There's Pyra, and there's Deucalion, and there's the statue of Themis. So that's quite an unusual. It's not a large painting by Tintoretto standards, barely 4 foot either way. Curious painting. The clouds look more like boulders. Now, Tintoretto produced The Last Supper many times. His earlier paintings portray the scene conventionally, a la Da Vinci's interpretation. So it's from a frontal perspective. So there we are. The table is there. The only divergence from Da Vinci's are these characters, these lateral characters, which we assume are waiting on the tables. Although obviously the children aren't waiting on the tables, but they're an addition. And the dog. I don't think there's a dog in Da Vinci's painting. This is large painting, 14 foot by 62 inches. Here's another version, completely different version, rendition of the scene. Nothing like Da Vinci's, as you can see, but very mannerist, and all the disciples are gesticulating wildly. And I think this captures the moment of when Jesus says that somebody is going to betray him, and they're all saying, "Who? What? Me? And not me, not me. I'm not going to do it." But so that begs the question: which is Judas? And is this guy, this apostle, sneaking away there, or not? Or this he looks a bit of a creep as well, doesn't he? So we're not sure who's Judas. This could be even Judas, keeping his head down while the question's being asked. So then we've got classical architecture in the background, so not Middle Eastern at all, as one would expect. And then the staircase on the left. So it's more mirrors the interior of a tavern, a Venetian tavern, perhaps. And there's a still life of books and manuscripts in that right-hand bottom corner there, and the chair has been upturned. So there's a lot of angst and soul-searching in this painting. Now then, when we come to another version that Tintoretto produced, almost at the same time as this painting, it's a different beast altogether. This is a very dark painting, and the table has been set back into the middle distance. Jesus there is at the end of the table instead of in the middle. And we know this is Jesus because he's got the suggestion of a halo over his head there. And then we've got all sorts of things going on in this tavern which might suggest the background work involved in producing this meal. And the ubiquitous dog barking at the table. So there we've got three out of several versions of Tintoretto's of the Last Supper, and this is a particularly large one, as you can see, 18 foot by 16 foot. So his assistants in the studio would have contributed a lot to this painting under Tintoretto's stewardship, of course. So this painting is Christ washing the disciples' feet. It's a much smaller painting, barely a meter deep and what, about 7 foot, something like that, long. So it's a more it's a quieter painting, isn't it? There's Jesus washing the disciples' feet. The dog there looking on, and this disciple here, we don't know who he is, or but he's either had his feet washed and he's drying them, or he's preparing to be the next on the list. And this is rather comical. These two, he's making great gestures to pull off his hosiery, I suppose, of this apostle who's yet to be washed. Notice the classical architecture, the columns in the background. There's nothing of the Middle East, but Venetian, of course. And as is the floor covering, it's definitely a contemporary floor covering there. I like the dog's face in this. Really indifferent to all that's going on. He's only interested in his next meal, of course, and that's quite right. Right, this is the voyage of Saint Ursula and the Virgins, and I've shown two versions of this because that is obviously in situ as an altarpiece in St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice, and then I've blown up the actual painting, but unfortunately, because it's blown up, we've lost a lot of definition. But it does give you an idea. And according to the legend, Saint Ursula travelled from England to Rome with 11,000 virgins. And then they all proceeded to Cologne to see the Pope. And there's the Pope. And there's Saint Ursula. And there's all the virgins lined up. I'm not quite sure why they did that. And the boats, you can see the boats in the background that brought them. So there's obviously more to this legend than I've divulged now, but so maybe you can look it up sometime. Seems a strange subject for a painting. It's not a particularly large painting, but then again, you can see from the in situ painting image that you get an impression of its size. Now this painting, painted right in the middle of the century, the 16th century, as the title suggests, this is Venus, Vulcan, and Mars. There's no prizes for guessing which is which. Obviously, this is Venus. This is Vulcan. He's been tipped off that she's having a liaison with Mars. Rather comically, Tintoretto's put Mars under the bed. He's hiding under the bed, and so we just to see his helmeted head poking out. And the dog doesn't think too much of that. He's obviously barking at his. So why he hasn't stayed under the bed, I don't know. But obviously, Tintoretto wants to suggest the Mars figure. And then we got this mirror image there of Vulcan. The goddess Venus is seen nude on a couch, while her lover Mars hides theatrically under the bed, as I've just said. Venus's husband Vulcan is tipped off by Apollo and has returned unexpectedly. And there we find Cupid in this cot by the window. So by Tintoretto's standards, this is quite a a small painting, really. And this painting has found its way to Munich. Now we come to a painting that many 15th, 16th, 17th centuries painters have dabbled with, Susanna and the Elders. And we've got three versions to look at, three Tintoretto versions. So I don't know how many of you are. Well, we've dealt with Susanna and the Elders in the past with other paintings. I'm not sure if Gentileschi didn't paint it, and maybe even Caravaggio, but I can't remember offhand. Anyway, it's from the Book of Daniel. The story is taken from the Book of Daniel. Susanna bathes in a pool in her garden, as she does every day. The elders, respectable members of the community, agree to wait until she is alone, and they have their wicked way with her. They threatened to denounce her if she rejected their advances, but she did anyway. So they falsely accused her of committing adultery with a young man. This was punishable by death. Daniel, then a young man himself, was impelled by an angel to intercede. He cross-examined the elders, and they were exposed as liars and condemned to death in her place. So this is one version. This version is in the Louvre, as you can see. I haven't got the dimensions of this version, but it could well be a large painting. So there we are. There's Susanna right in the middle there, and there are the elders peeping over the whatever. We're not quite sure what that is. So it's fairly self-explanatory. So we'll move on to the next one. The same theme again, but this is slightly more, to my mind, more comical. And if you look for the elders, there's one peeping round this foliage screen, and there's another one. His bald head is very prominent, as you can see. So Tintoretto has given us a comical version, I think, of this story. She's looking into the mirror as befits what she's doing. There's an awful lot going on in this painting. There's a lot of foliage and a bit of trellising there, and the background is filled in with all sorts of trellising and garden paraphernalia. So we'll move on to the third version. This is in the Prado, and it's a lot smaller, as you can see, 2 foot by, barely 2 foot by 4 foot, which is why the definition isn't so good. The foliage is quite fussily painted, isn't it? Very much in the Mannerist style. Look at this elder on the right here, making these exaggerated gestures, and this elder on the left, he's already taking liberties with Susanna, as you can see. Right. Now this is a much smaller painting. This is in the Courtauld Institute in London. It's only 9 inches tall by just over 2 foot. Latona, changing the peasants into frogs, depicts a mythical story taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. Latona, the mother of Apollo and Diana, transformed peasants into frogs after they prevented her from drinking from the local lake by stirring the mud. So Tintoretto has the peasants stirring the mud, as you can see, knee deep in the water, and this is Latona with her 2 children. There's the evidence of very quick impressionistic strokes, as you can see here. No attempt at any sort of detail, really. He's more interested in the figures. Compared to some of his huge canvases, one wonders why he bothered with this, to be honest. This is an interesting painting. This is the Adoration of the Shepherds, and we get a different perspective of the stable where Jesus was born, of course. Tintoretto has given us a 2-tier version of the stable. And we see him also borrowing symbols from outside the Christian tradition. For instance, the peacock, there's the peacock, is a conventional symbol of resurrection and immortality. The woman in the foreground there, she's looking into a mirror. And is that a symbol of pride? Or it has also been suggested that because of the tilt of the mirror, she's trying to see the image of Jesus Christ in the manger there. So I prefer the latter explanation myself. Such ambiguities abound in this painting. The turned backs, the backs that are turned towards us, invite us into the picture, yet they distance us as well. It's as though we are among the people who are looking in on the scene. So that's a curious interpretation of the Adoration of the Shepherds. This shepherd is offering something up, but the Mary and Joseph don't seem to be oblivious to it, and not sure who these characters are, or even how they got up to this second level in the painting. But this is a very large painting, as you can see, 17 foot by 15 foot wide. As with most of these paintings, it's in Venice. This is the Raising of Lazarus, quite a small painting, 26 inches by 31 inches. It's rather a confused picture, complex and full of dynamic gesturing again, but which one is Lazarus? Is this Lazarus? Or is this Lazarus, or just another body that's been exhumed with him? There's no doubt as to whom Jesus is, because he's crowned with a halo there, so that's Jesus, and this is Mary and Martha, presumably. But we're not sure who Lazarus is. I take this to be Lazarus, possibly, but I've no reason to say that. The vibrant and expressive gestures of the figures captured the drama of this miraculous event. Critics have said Tintoretto's skillful use of chiaroscuro and his masterful composition draws the viewer's attention to the central narrative, while simultaneously conveying the tension and awe surrounding the miraculous rising of Lazarus. Well, that's critic speak. I'll leave you to make up your own minds about this painting. We've got in the top left-hand corner there, we've got the many figures, they're highlighted with light, and the figures on the right at the top, they're in darkness, and I just alluded to the chiaroscuro. Oh, it's a very difficult word to say that. I always have trouble with it. But bold colouring again there, as befits the Mannerist style. Now we come to the pièce de résistance, the Paradise canvas in the Doge's Palace. As I said, this is the largest ever painting done on canvas. 22 meters. If you can imagine, a cricket pitch is slightly smaller than, I think 22 yards is a cricket pitch. So it's the size of a cricket pitch. You could bowl a ball from one end of it to the other, and it's 9 meters deep as well. That in itself is impressive. So I'll just let you take that in, and then we'll look at a detail of that part of it in a minute. This lady standing in the bottom right-hand corner does give you an idea of the size of this painting. So it's actually a painting of the Virgin interceding with Christ. So that's the Virgin and that's Jesus Christ. Now we'll see them up close now. There we are, we can see them better now. And they are surrounded by a semicircle of cherubim and seraphim, as you can see. It's an awful lot going on in this picture, a lot of figures. The Archangel Gabriel is shown offering a lily to Mary. There's the Archangel Gabriel. And she is depicted with 7 stars round her head. The divine light emanates from the figure of Christ himself, of course. To his left is the Archangel Michael, holding out the scales of justice. So I take this to be Michael, though the scales of justice aren't very evident to me anyway. The evangelists appear in a semicircle immediately beneath the main scene, with the saints aligned in the same order in which they figure in church litanies. So there we are, the evangelists are all in that semicircle. The composition is crowded with around 500 figures, apparently. There you are in total, and there you are in detail. Now we come on to some portrait painting. This is Procurator Antonio Capello, one of the first portraits that Tintoretto painted of the procurators. We're going to see some more now. And procurators were powerful Venetian officers of state, so they ran the city. It's said that the colour is only thinly applied, and the structure of the canvas also plays a part. It lends the painted surface a vibrant character, portraying the sitter very much alive. So if we were standing in front of this portrait, which isn't particularly big, it's 44 by 31, we would see the canvas, the texture of the canvas in places, presumably we'd see it particularly under the cloak that he's wearing. Not a particularly expressive face, I don't think. This one is far more interesting. This is one of his so-called portraits in motion. The Prado tells us, and I'm going to quote from the Prado's blurb, while the model is not an old man, his age is marked by his baldness, the deep wrinkles around his eyes, and the grey hairs in his beard. Technically, the dense brushstrokes that make up the flesh stones contrast with the lighter, more superficial ones on the hair. The hands are rendered in a surprisingly meticulous fashion that leaves the muscles and veins clearly visible. Well, again, we'd have to be standing in front of it to discern that, I think. The palette is quite limited, although the artist skillfully exploits the possibilities of the figure's black clothing, punctuating it with the white collar and cuffs, and of course the gold chain, which gives the title to the painting. The most likely identity of the man, the Prado tells us, is a Venetian aristocrat called Niccolo Zen. Don't know anything about Niccolo Zen, but he must have been important in Venice in his day. In 1567, Pietro was elected Doge at the grand old age of 85, which came to him as an absolute surprise. I'm not surprised. I don't think he's got over his surprise yet, looking at his face. He had been a diplomat and naval commander in his life. It said he was religious and morally upright, educated and wise. Well, I should hope so too. Pietro was reluctant at the beginning to take the office, and in the 2.5 years of his reign showed gifts of fairness and prudence, we're told. He had a sad ending. He choked on a grape. This painting has found its way to Australia, as you can see. Not over big painting. This is another Doge, Alvise Moncenigo. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but about the same time. It's about the same size and time. At the time of his accession, the Ottoman Empire was preparing to wage war against Venice. The conflict broke out in 1570. Venice was forced to sign an unfavourable treaty of peace with the Turks, by which it recognized the loss of Cyprus. Alvise hung himself 4 years later. The inference there is that he might have shouldered the blame for the loss of Cyprus, but we don't know. So I think we'd have to say that Tintoretto, not the most brilliant of portrait painters, was he? But I suppose he had to do these portraits to keep in with the Doge office. This is Madonna of the Treasurers. Curious title. It was commissioned for the Palazzo dei Camerlengi, the financial magistracy of the Venetian Republic, and depicts the Virgin Mary with the baby Jesus, surrounded by the 3 treasurers who commissioned the work, along with their secretaries on the extreme right there. So these are the chaps who commissioned Tintoretto to pay this rather large painting, 17 foot long by 3 foot tall. Curiously, we've got on the extreme left here, we've got an image of Saint Sebastian. We know it's Saint Sebastian because of he was martyred by arrows, was he not? But what he's actually doing, it's almost as though he's wandered in from another painting. It's very curious, that. I couldn't find any explanations to why Saint Sebastian is in this painting. So another procurator, Vincenza Morosini. This is in the National Gallery, actually, in London. It's not over large, 33 by 21. At the time of his, right. No, he was a leading member of the Venetian elite. His pose suggests world weariness. Well, it's certainly his face does. He wears his golden sash denoting knighthood. There is a sense we are in the presence of a real person, the critics tell us. Tintoretto achieves this by leading us away from the body into the dreamy landscape. On the right, we're told by curators also that he seduces our view with the unflashy effects of muted gold on dark burgundy flecked by foamy white. His face is long and sculpted, suggestive of a prophet's, it's said. His eyes look back at us suspiciously. I think I'd have to agree with that. Back to religious paintings. This is Christ carried to the tomb. Tintoretto's painting was made for the altar of the Del Basso family chapel in the Venetian church of San Francesco della Vigna. Prints of the altarpiece record its original appearance before it was cut from the frame. It was much taller and arched in shape, with an angel on the top holding a crown of thorns. Now the angel's feet are still just visible, and there they are. There are the angel's feet. But we no longer have an angel to claim them. Below Christ's elongated body, and shades of El Greco in the elongation of this body, in the center of the figure is the a swooning, grief-stricken mother, and there she is. I would say that was at the bottom, not in the center. The painted flickering torchlight heightens the mood of despair, critics tell us. So again, all the characters except for Jesus, who's dead obviously, are in various attitudes of gesture and appellation. There's a conversation going on the extreme right there in mid-painting, and this character's cropped completely. Not too many characters in this painting. This is in Edinburgh, this painting, by the way. Not over large, 64 by 50. Not by Tintoretto's standards, anyway. Typical Mannerist painting, though. This is a curious painting. Origin of the Milky Way. Full of dynamic movement and exaggerated figures, as you can see. According to the legend, Jupiter wanted to make his son Hercules, and there we see Hercules there, very young Hercules. He wanted to make him immortal by having him drink the breast milk of his sleeping wife Juno. So that's what he's doing there. He's putting Hercules to the teat of Juno. However, she feels a pinch and wakens up and finds this strange child nursing at her breast. She jerks away, resulting in the milk spurting upwards to form the Milky Way, and that's obviously suggested by these stars here. The Milky Way is a hazy cloud depicted behind the eagle seen clutching Jupiter's lightning bolt. So that's not very helpful, is it? Besides Juno are peacocks, a bird often associated with her. There are the peacocks. Other elements further tell the story, such as the putti and the objects they are holding. So there we are, there's the putti at the bottom there, another one there. Over time, the painting has sustained damage through poor care, we're told. Tintoretto again took care in painting the human form in motion. He paid attention to the way the muscles tense and the skin flexes to get the illusion of movement. Juno's pose is particularly mannerist and complex because she's seen turning in opposite directions simultaneously. The body is twisted unnaturally, allowing her to turn in multiple directions and show the milk spraying randomly. Well, I don't think that's a very fair comment. I leave you to look at the painting and decide for yourself. Yes, she's been taken by surprise, but I don't think it's. I think Tintoretto, if he'd wanted to, could have made this more obvious. This is not an over big painting, 58 by 6 foot, basically. 5 foot by 6 foot. So that is the origin of the Milky Way, which we never see in this part of the world. At least I haven't seen it since I left the Midlands 50 years ago. 60 years ago. Finding the body of St. Mark. This painting depicts Venice's acquisition of the body of St. Mark. St. Mark, of course, is buried in the cathedral in St. Mark's Square, as you probably know. St. Mark is shown curing the sick. I think we've got to assume that this is St. Mark. An elder kneels acknowledging the miracles. There we are. So there is a temptation to think in terms of that being St. Mark, but I think this is St. Mark. In places, the work appears unfinished. The tiles of the floor and the cornices are still visible through some clothing and figures. Well, we can't see that from this reproduction. But if we were standing in, though this figure here certainly looks unfinished to me. And this is a square painting, 160 inches by 160, so 12-foot square basically, maybe 13-foot square. What's going on here? Somebody's been lowered down from this upper tier, I think, but it's rather precarious. I suspect he's going to land on his head, the way Tintoretto's painted him. But that seems to be what's happening. He's being lowered down so that St. Mark can heal him. And St. Mark seems to be acknowledging the event. This character here doesn't look very well. And look at these mannerist gestures. This man is hanging on to this woman for whatever reason. She's so overcome by the fact of the miracles, presumably. Curious painting. This painting is in Milan. Now this is a ceiling fresco. The Saint Roch. The saint became the protector of those that contracted the plague, and his relics rest in the St. Roch's Church in Venice. He is painted in an impressive foreshortening so that he dominates the scene. So there's St. Roch. You'd have to be standing underneath this on the floor, obviously, to appreciate it. But you can see how he's painted in a foreshortened pose. The saint looks up towards God, who is waiting for him with open arms. There we are, very, very much a Michelangelo God, I think. He's surrounded by golden light which merges with the frame of the same colour. Saint Roch was born in Montpellier in France, actually, in 1345 or 1350, right thereabouts anyway. He dedicated his life to heal those who were sick with plague, roaming Italy from city to city. Now we come to a large canvas. This is in the Scuola Grande di San Rocco, which we saw at the beginning of the talk, 16 foot by 37 feet. So this is a very long, long elongated painting, filled with figures and onlookers. There's no doubt as to who is Christ, and he's on the cross, of course. One of his many large paintings from the Scuola. He painted the crucifixion several times. This is the largest, grandest, and most dramatic of his paintings. The figures seem self-illuminated, and the cross itself almost disappears at the top there, so we don't get the top of it. Christ is painted as a supremely fit man, almost Herculean. The scene below is like an opera stage set, overlooked by Christ's head, which is practically scraping the top of the canvas, as you can see. Well, we learned earlier in the talk that Tintoretto did a lot of stage sets. The other malefactors' crosses are still being erected, so that Tintoretto has us focus exclusively on Jesus, of course. There's an awful lot of people in this painting, painted again in the Mannerist style. But I have a problem with the perspective of the ladder. The ladder seems to be leaned against the back of the cross. But there's something wrong with that. I'll leave you to look at it, and it doesn't seem to work to me. And this huddle of characters at the bottom, they seem to be, there's something wrong with the perspective as well. We've got to imagine where the cross goes into the ground there, and they seem to be too close to the bottom of the cross somehow. Right. No problem with perspective with this painting. Christ before Pilate. The dramatic staging of the scene is completely original. The figure of Christ wrapped in a white mantle stands out against the crowd as though lit from within. He stands tall in front of Pilate, who is portrayed in shadow and in red robes. A servant washes his hands, famously. There we are. His hands are being washed. But Tintoretto's equally interested in the old secretary at the foot of Pilate's dais. And there he is, in white. His whiteness almost competes with Jesus's robes. Notice the elaborate architecture behind Pilate. Again, borrowing from classical architecture of and what might be seen in Venice, but certainly nothing arabesque about it. Its splendor actually evokes the power and wealth of Rome. By contrast, the pale figure of Christ catches the light and is obviously the focus of the painting. So it's almost as though his light is illuminating these characters, these soldiers, or I take it to be soldiers. So it's emboldening the red of their tunics, and also Pilate's tunic. This is a large painting as well, 16 foot by 10 foot, from the Schola. Miracle of the Loaves and Fishes. This canvas has found its way to the Met in New York. It's 14 foot by 10 foot. The Met catalogue tells us, and I'm quoting from it, its broad horizontal composition is typical of Venetian paintings designed to decorate the lateral wall of a chapel or the long central hall of a palace. Tintoretto collaborated with his assistants to produce these vast works. He places women in the foreground to emphasize their role as nurturers by giving several of them children. So that's the Met interpretation of this painting, which is framed in this illustration, as you can see. So there's Jesus center stage, offering the bread to this character here. But the rest of the people in this painting don't seem to be very concerned about it. He's about to deliver the Sermon on the Mount, is he not? This is an interesting painting, the Annunciation, and an interesting interpretation of the Annunciation. The painting is, again, from the Schola Grande. Its innovative perspective places the viewer mid-air, looking down into Mary's house. The old straw chair below the angel emphasizes the poverty of Virgin, authentically painted, as well as the dilapidated brickwork of the column there. The two-coloured floor, the large tiles of the floor, the work basket and its contents, at the Virgin's feet. Well, there we are. In the background, the large bed covered by a canopy, so it's all suggestive of her poverty. And if we go outside the room, we find Joseph busy at work. Tintoretto's painting illustrates the angel's greeting. Notice the swarm of naked putti, like the wash of a boat above there. The Holy Spirit is painted in the form of a golden dove. The angel's clothing or cloak or whatever angels wear is extremely bright, and as you can see, it dominates the painting, though it's picked up in the stucco plaster, the peeling plaster of this column. But typically, Mary is shown just gesturing wildly, being horrified by this sudden appearance of the angel. This is the flight into Egypt. Only a few paintings on this theme have the family having crossed the water, as they appear to have done in this painting. So they've already made the crossing. The other people are attempting to cross or beginning their cross, but the assumption of this painting is that they've already crossed. Having left the peaceful river behind them, Joseph pushes through a dark terrain towards the unknown which lies beyond the painting's edge, of course. He leads an ass, a stubborn ass. It's quite a dark painting, this. Very large, 14 foot by 19 foot, and again in the schooler. This painting involves the circumcision of Jesus Christ. Luke tells us that Jesus was circumcised when 8 days old. The officiant accepts the child with his hands covered by a cloth, and there's no white knife in evidence. So there's the officiant. Looks very stern, doesn't he? Very cross, very fierce. The virtue of charity is conventionally personified by a woman suckling a child, bottom left. There she is. To the right, the priest and deacons are several members of the scuola who commissioned this painting. So there they are. They've got their portraits painted. This is another large painting, almost 16 foot square, but not quite. A curious subject. I don't recall many paintings involving the circumcision of Jesus. This is the Assumption of the Virgin. As the Virgin rises up, the apostles separate, each caught in a particular emotional attitude and hyperbole of gestures as befits the Mannerist style. So there's the Virgin on her way to heaven. It's almost as though she's being pulled back down by this cherub. "15 foot by nearly 20 foot, this painting. Here we have Bacchus, Ariadne, and Venus, which makes a change from the Christian iconography. It depicts the god Bacchus arriving from the sea with a wreath and a skirt of vine leaves, bearing a bunch of grapes and a marriage ring. There you are, you can just see the marriage ring. And she's holding her finger out, her wedding finger out, her ring finger out. Ariadne is extending, as I just said, her ring finger in anticipation as the goddess Venus crowns her with a crown of stars. So this is Venus, that's Bacchus obviously, and that is Ariadne. Ariadne was the half-sister of the Minotaur and had helped Theseus escape after he had killed her half-brother. Theseus later abandoned her on the island of Naxos, where she was discovered by Bacchus. Bacchus and Ariadne were married, and Ariadne elevated to join the gods. She personified Venus, the marriage representing the union of Venice with the sea. So that's the penultimate painting we're going to look at this morning. There's a small boat I've just noticed there. I wonder if that is the boat which is taking Theseus away from her. Titian deals with that. that scene a lot more clearly, you might remember. Right, the last painting, we've come to the last painting now. Gathering of the manna. In the foreground, we see Israelites gathering the wafer pieces of manna, while others behind them go about their daily duties. Moses sits in the lower right corner. God's gift of manna is narrated in Exodus. Short of food, the people grumble against Moses and Aaron. So God tells Moses he will send manna, and the Israelites are to gather each morning to collect it. So again, an awful lot of characters in this painting, 12 foot by 19 foot. And look at all the lined up there, all the Jews lined up there, waiting their turn to collect the manna, presumably. Very typical Tintoretto painting. This I take to be Moses, the seated figure there, and that would be Aaron, his brother. So the only other thing I'm going to show you today is Tintoretto's grave in Venice, and there it is. You can just see Jacobi Robusti. Right.